The chocolates I never tasted. A story about birthdays, betrayal, and the sweetest. On my 71st birthday, my daughter-in-law sent me a box of the finest Belgian chocolates money could buy, and I gave every last one of them to my accountant. 3 days later, she wished she had never been born. Daniel Whitmore had lived long enough to know when a gift was not a gift. He'd learned that lesson the hard way through 31 years of marriage to a woman who once handed him a vacuum cleaner for Christmas with a bow on it and a smile that said, "This is really for both of us, sweetheart." Margaret had passed 4 years ago, God rest her, and Daniel had learned much from her about the art of reading people, about the weight of a gesture, about what sits beneath the wrapping paper. He was standing in the kitchen of his craftsman home in Asheville, North Carolina, still in his pajamas at 10 in the morning because it was his birthday, and he was 71 years old, and he had decided some time ago that 71-year-olds who lived alone were permitted to do whatever they damn well pleased before noon. The coffee was strong. The November light came through the window above the sink in long, pale slants, catching the dust motes floating above the African violets Margaret had planted on the sill, and which Daniel had, against all odds, kept alive these 4 years. The doorbell rang at 10:14. It was a courier, a young man in a black jacket and a cap, holding a glossy dark brown box tied with a ribbon the color of old Burgundy wine, the kind of packaging that costs more than the thing inside it. "Mr. Whitmore, from Mrs. Serena Whitmore. She says happy birthday." Daniel took the box. He thanked the young man. He closed the door. He set the box on the kitchen table and stood looking at it with his coffee cup in both hands the way a general might study a map before a battle. He read the card tucked beneath the ribbon. "Happy birthday, Daniel. Wishing you all the best. Serena." Not Dad, not Father Daniel, not even Daniel with an exclamation point the way people write when they're trying to sound enthusiastic but aren't. Just Daniel, clean, clinical, and 2 words short of warm. He opened the box anyway. Inside, nestled in pleated brown paper like sleeping royalty, were 24 handcrafted Belgian chocolates from a shop in Charlotte that he happened to know charged $42 for a box this size. He knew because his son Marcus had taken him there once, 2 Christmases ago, before things between the families had gotten complicated. The gift. Serena Whitmore, née Beaumont, had married Daniel's son Marcus 11 years ago in a ceremony that cost more than Daniel's first house. She was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful, all surface and shine and maintenance. Dark hair, sharp eyes, a laugh that arrived exactly when it was supposed to and departed just as precisely. Daniel had liked her in the beginning, or he had tried to. He'd given her the full measure of his good faith, as he always did with people, right up until the moment she had made him understand, without ever quite saying so, that she considered him a problem to be managed. It started small, subtle, the way she redirected conversations at family dinners whenever Daniel brought up the old house, or the business he'd spent 30 years building, or the grandchildren's education. She had opinions about all of these things, and the opinions were not wrong, exactly, but the delivery, the slight tightening at the corners of her eyes when Daniel spoke, the way she'd glance at Marcus with a look that said there he goes again, had worn grooves into Daniel over the years. Like water carving stone, slow, invisible until the damage was done. Then 18 months ago, the matter of the trust. Daniel had built Whitmore Building Supplies from nothing. 2 trucks, a rented warehouse, and a phone book, 1978. He had expanded it through 2 recessions, a divorce scare, a warehouse fire, and the great hardware store consolidation of the early 2000s that ate smaller suppliers alive. When he finally sold the company in 2019, he had enough to ensure that Marcus, his daughter Claire, and eventually the grandchildren would never have to worry about money the way Daniel once had. He had set it all up properly, a revocable living trust. His attorney, a quiet, precise man named Robert Forsyth, whom Daniel had known since 1991, had drawn it up with the thoroughness of someone who treated other people's legacies as seriously as his own. The trust designated equal shares for Marcus and Claire, with provisions for the grandchildren, and it gave Daniel full control and usage rights for the remainder of his life. All well and good, until Daniel's accountant, a woman named Patricia Home, had called him on a Tuesday in April to ask, very carefully, whether Daniel had intended to request a copy of his own trust documents from the county clerk's office, because someone had. "What do you mean someone had?" Daniel had asked. "Someone made an inquiry, Daniel, an authorized inquiry using your name. I thought you should know." He had not made any such inquiry. He had not asked Marcus to make it either. And Claire, his daughter, lived in Portland and was busy raising 3 children and running a landscape architecture firm, and had approximately 0 interest in reading trust documents. Which left one candidate. Daniel had not said anything to Marcus. Not yet. He was a man who believed in knowing the full shape of a thing before he named it. He'd spent 6 months watching, listening, quietly gathering, the way he once had during a long labor dispute at the warehouse in 1994, when he'd known someone was leaking information but hadn't yet known who. And now it was his birthday, and a $42 box of chocolates had arrived from his daughter-in-law with a note that contained no warmth and no remorse, and Daniel Whitmore understood exactly what it was. It was a distraction, a little sweetness to keep him looking at the surface while something moved beneath it. He picked up the box, carried it to the front hall, set it beside his car keys, and made a phone call. "Patricia," he said when she picked up, "are you in the office this afternoon?" "I am. Everything all right?" "Everything's fine. I'm bringing you something, and then I need you to walk me through everything you found." Patricia Home had been Daniel's accountant for 16 years. She was 54 precise, and had the manner of someone who had decided early in life that facts were the only reliable company. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and kept her office at a temperature that made most visitors wish they'd brought a jacket. Daniel had always liked her enormously. He arrived at her office on Merriman Avenue at 2 in the afternoon, carrying the chocolate box with its burgundy ribbon still tied. He set it on her desk. "Happy early Christmas," he said. She looked at the box, then at him, then removed her reading glasses. "You're giving me a birthday present, on your own birthday." "They're from Serena." Patricia understood. She pulled the box toward her without another word. They sat down. The office was quiet. The assistant had gone to lunch, and Daniel crossed his legs and waited while Patricia opened a manila folder he recognized from the last time they'd spoken. She laid 3 pages of printed documents on the desk between them like cards in a hand of poker. "All right," she said, "here's what I know." The trust documents had been accessed twice, once in April and once in September, both times using Daniel's name and the last 4 digits of his social security number, information that would be known to a spouse of someone who shared a household with the trust grantor. Marcus and Serena shared all finances. It wasn't difficult to imagine how the number had been obtained. More importantly, Patricia had done her own quiet digging over the summer, the kind of digging that was her particular genius, the kind that left no marks. What she had found was that Serena had consulted, on 3 separate occasions, with an estate attorney in Biltmore Village, not Robert Forsyth, Daniel's attorney, but a different firm entirely, one that specialized in what their website called estate reorganization and beneficiary planning. Daniel listened without moving. "She's looking for leverage," Patricia said. "She wants to know the architecture of the trust before she needs to use that knowledge. The most likely scenario is that she and Marcus are having trouble," Daniel finished quietly. Patricia looked at him over her glasses. "Or she's planning for a future in which Marcus is not the primary decision-maker in their household, which could mean several things." Daniel sat with that for a moment. Outside, a car passed on Merriman, A woman walked a dog on the sidewalk. The afternoon light was the color of old honey. "My son," Daniel said slowly, "has not called me in 6 weeks." Patricia nodded. "I know. He called on my birthday in previous years, every year since he was old enough to dial a phone." "I know," she said again more gently. Daniel looked down at his hands. "She's been managing his access to me." Patricia did not answer. She didn't need to. The grandchildren. Marcus and Serena had 2 children, Lily, who was 9, and Oliver, who was 6. They were Daniel's grandchildren, and he loved them with the particular fierce tenderness of someone who knows that love is a finite and precious thing, and that time goes very quickly. Lily had Margaret's eyes, that same gray-green, searching and clear. Oliver had Marcus's ears and Daniel's stubbornness, a combination that already at 6 produced a child of remarkable immovability on subjects that mattered to him, including which color cup he drank from and whether dogs were better than cats. They were, non-negotiably. Daniel had not seen them in 2 months. The visits had dwindled. It had happened gradually, the way these things always happen: one canceled weekend, then a conflict with a birthday party, then a trip, then a month going by without a plan being made, then 2 months. Daniel had driven by the house once, not quite meaning to, on his way back from the hardware store, and he had seen Lily in the front yard with a jump rope, and she had waved at him. And for a moment the sight of her had made his chest feel very full and very empty at the same time. He had called Marcus that evening. The call had gone to voicemail. He'd called again 3 days later. Marcus had called back, sounding rushed, distracted, speaking in the clipped short sentences of a man who is having a conversation in earshot of someone he doesn't want to offend. "Hey, Dad. Yeah, things are busy. We'll get together soon. Serena's got a lot on her plate. I'll call you this weekend." He had not called that weekend. Daniel was not a man who indulged self-pity. He considered it an indulgence he could not afford, the same way he'd never allowed himself it during the lean years of the business, when staying clear-eyed was the only thing that kept the operation alive. But sitting in Patricia's office that November afternoon, he allowed himself, briefly, to feel the full weight of what had been quietly happening to his family. The small, patient architecture of separation that his daughter-in-law had been constructing, brick by careful brick, while he had been tending his plants and drinking his coffee and assuming, as people do, that love is its own protection against erosion. It is not. Love requires maintenance. Daniel knew this. Margaret had taught him this too. He straightened in his chair. "All right," he said, "what can we do?" Patricia opened a second folder. "Tea." Hat Daniel did next. He did quietly and without hurry, and with the patience of a man who had spent a career learning that the most consequential decisions are not the loud ones. The first thing he did was call Robert Forsyth. Robert had been drawing up wills and trusts and estate plans for 30 years, and he listened to Daniel without interrupting, a quality Daniel had always admired in him, and then he asked one careful question. "Daniel, what do you want the outcome to be?" "I want my grandchildren protected," Daniel said. "I want my son to have access to what I've built because it is his inheritance and he has earned it. But I want to make sure that the decisions about how those assets are used, if something were to change in Marcus's circumstances, personally, maritally, are made with my grandchildren's best interests at the center, not anyone else's interests, theirs." "That's achievable," Robert said. "It will require restructuring. The trust as it currently stands gives Marcus broad discretionary power as co-trustee. We can add protections. A professional co-trustee requirement. Provisions for the grandchildren's educational and residential needs that cannot be redirected without their reaching majority." "Can it be done quietly?" "Completely legally. A grantor can amend a revocable trust at any time for any reason. You don't need to tell anyone." Daniel nodded. "Do it." The second thing he did was call Claire in Portland. Claire was 46 and practical and loved her brother while having no illusions about him, which Daniel had always considered the most useful kind of love. She listened to the whole story on a Tuesday evening while her children presumably did homework in other rooms, and when Daniel finished she was quiet for a moment and then said, "Dad, why did you wait so long to tell me?" "Because I wasn't sure," he said, "and because I didn't want to start a war over a suspicion. And now I'm sure, and I'm not starting a war. I'm just making sure the children are safe regardless of what happens." Claire drove to Asheville the following weekend. She and Daniel sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the chocolates had sat 3 weeks earlier, and they talked for 4 hours, and then they called Marcus together. The son, Marcus Whitmore, was 43 years old and had spent the last several years in the slow-motion confusion of a man who loves his wife and his father equally, and has been convinced over time that this is not possible, that one love must diminish the other. He had not understood, or not wanted to understand, that the managing of this supposed conflict had come from outside himself, that the distance between him and his father had been constructed, not discovered. When Claire called and he heard her voice and then his father's, something in him, some long-compressed thing, shifted. You could hear it in the silence that preceded his first words, a silence that lasted long enough that Claire said, "Marcus, you still there?" "I'm here," he said, and his voice was different from the rushed, clipped voice of the man who had called Daniel back that last time. It was quieter, more careful. "Dad, I'm really glad you called." Daniel let Claire do most of the talking. She had always been the more precise communicator, less likely to let feelings swamp the facts, and he listened as she laid out what Patricia had found, what Robert had confirmed, what the trust inquiry meant and when it had happened. She was not cruel about it. She stated things plainly and let Marcus be quiet in between. There was a long silence after Claire finished. "She told me," Marcus said finally, "that you were getting older, that it was responsible to understand the financial landscape, that she was doing it for us, for the kids." "I know," Daniel said. "She's not wrong that it was information worth knowing. The question is what someone intended to do with it." Another silence. "Things haven't been good," Marcus said quietly, "between us for a while." "I know that too," Daniel said. And then, because he was a father and he loved his son with the uncomplicated love that exists before and beneath all the complications, "Whatever is happening in your marriage, Marcus, is your business and I won't put my nose into it unless you ask. But your children are my grandchildren, and I need you to know that I have made sure they are protected, no matter what." Marcus said nothing for a long time. Then Daniel heard something on the other end of the phone that he hadn't heard in a very long time, the sound of his son crying. Not loudly. The restrained, almost silent crying of a grown man who has been holding something very heavy for a long time and has just been told he can set it down. "I'm sorry I didn't call on your birthday," Marcus said. "You didn't call," Daniel said, "but you sent chocolates." A pause. "I didn't send chocolates, Dad." Daniel looked across the table at Claire. She raised her eyebrows. "No," Daniel said, "I didn't think so." The reckoning. Serena had sent the chocolates herself, without telling Marcus, using the joint account they shared, a fact that Patricia had been able to confirm when Marcus, now fully in the picture, checked the account statement and found the charge from the Charlotte chocolatier dated the morning of Daniel's birthday. It was $42 and change. It had been intended to look like a peace offering while being something else entirely. A signal to Daniel that she was watching, that she was making gestures, that she was managing optics. What it had done instead was hand Daniel precisely the opening he needed. He did not confront Serena. He never had any intention of confronting Serena. Confrontation was for people who needed the other party to acknowledge wrongdoing, and Daniel had long since stopped needing anyone's acknowledgement of anything. He understood that the most durable outcomes were the ones you built quietly, while others were busy performing. The trust amendments were completed in the third week of November. The grandchildren's educational and housing provisions were ironclad. A professional co-trustee, a bank trust department Robert had used for years, was added for any distribution decisions. Marcus remained a beneficiary, fully and completely. But the architecture was now resistant to the kind of lateral pressure that Serena had clearly been exploring. Marcus had also, in that same week, begun meeting with a marriage counselor, alone first, then requesting Serena join. She had agreed, which surprised Daniel and perhaps surprised Marcus too, but Daniel had learned decades ago never to underestimate someone's capacity to pivot when they understood the territory had shifted beneath them. He did not know what would happen to Marcus's marriage. He hoped it would survive. He hoped. With the kind of open-handed and unclenched hope he had developed only with age, that Serena might become someone different than she had been, that the version of her who consulted estate attorneys in secret might give way, in time, to something more honest. People were capable of this. He had seen it. Margaret herself had been a different woman at 60 than she had been at 35, softer in the right places, sharper only where it mattered. He did not know. He simply made sure his grandchildren were safe. The birthday he would remember. The Sunday after Thanksgiving, Marcus brought the children to Daniel's house in Asheville. He came alone, without Serena, who had a prior engagement, or perhaps had been asked not to come, or had chosen not to, the details of which Daniel did not need to know. He came with Lily and Oliver and a grocery bag full of ingredients for Daniel's birthday dinner, which had been postponed 3 weeks on account of everything. Oliver arrived first, sprinting from the car before it had fully stopped, which was a habit that had alarmed Marcus for years, and threw himself at Daniel's legs with the particular force of a 6-year-old who has been saving enthusiasm for a long time and is now spending it all at once. "Grandpa, we brought cake stuff. I'm going to put the frosting on." "Are you?" Daniel said, steadying himself and laughing, one hand on Oliver's head. "Yes, Dad said I could." Lily walked up more slowly, in the manner of a 9-year-old who is old enough to know something has been happening and young enough not to know exactly what, and she took Daniel's hand and held it while she said hello, which was so much like something Margaret would have done that it stopped him for a moment, cleanly and completely, in the middle of the front walk. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. "Happy birthday, sorry it's late." "Best late birthday I've had in years," he told her. Marcus came last, carrying the grocery bag, and he and Daniel looked at each other for a moment over the children's heads, and something passed between them that had no words and needed none. The particular understanding between fathers and sons who have found their way back through the underbrush to each other and are standing now in a clearing, blinking in the light. They went inside. The afternoon was cold and bright, the mountains beyond the window blue and sharp-edged the way they get in late November. Oliver immediately commandeered the kitchen counter and issued instructions about the frosting that no one had asked for and everyone accepted. Lily sat at the kitchen table and helped Daniel sort through a drawer of old photographs he'd been meaning to organize for 2 years, and she asked careful, curious questions about who the people in the pictures were, and Daniel answered each one. Marcus cooked. He made Margaret's beef stew he'd called Claire the previous week and asked for the recipe, which Claire had given him along with a set of instructions that were, by all accounts, extremely detailed, and the kitchen filled up with the smell of it, thyme and warm broth and browning meat, a smell that lived in Daniel's memory at a level beneath thought. They ate at the table. Oliver spilled his juice and was unconcerned about it. Lily told a story about her teacher that lasted 11 minutes and was genuinely riveting. Marcus ate more than Daniel had seen him eat in years, the appetite of a man who has set something down and found, to his surprise, that his hands are free. After dinner, Oliver applied the frosting to the birthday cake. The cake was, as a result, a creative work of some ambition. The frosting was distributed in the manner of a 6-year-old's understanding of geometry, which is to say boldly and without straight lines, and with at least 40% more frosting on one side than the other. Lily wrote "Happy Birthday Grandpa" in red decorating gel, and the letters were uneven, and the P in Grandpa listed noticeably to the left, and Daniel thought it was the most beautiful cake he had ever seen. They sang. Oliver sang louder than necessary and slightly off-key and with great conviction. Daniel blew out the candles, 7 and 1, 71, the same number of candles Margaret had once blown out, and they all clapped. "What did you wish for?" Oliver demanded. "You're not supposed to say," Lily told him, "or it won't come true." "It will come true," Daniel said, looking around the table at his son and his grandchildren in the warm kitchen light, at the evidence of the evening all around them, the spilled juice and the lopsided cake, and the pot still on the stove and the photographs spread across the counter where he and Lily had left them. It already has. The following Monday, Patricia sent Daniel a handwritten note on plain white cardstock. It said, "The chocolates were extraordinary. I shared them with the office. Best birthday gift I've ever received from someone else's daughter-in-law. P." Daniel laughed when he read it, the full, unguarded laugh of a man who has nothing left to manage and no performance left to give. He put the note on the refrigerator beside a drawing Oliver had made 2 years ago of a dog that looked like a rectangle with legs, which Daniel had kept because he kept everything. He never told Serena what he had found, or what he had done. He never needed to. The trust amendment was a matter of public record, filed with the county, and Robert Forsyth had sent a copy to all named parties as required by law. When Serena received her copy in the mail the second week of December, she would read it carefully, as Daniel knew she would, and she would understand exactly what had happened and exactly how thoroughly the architecture she'd been quietly exploring had been rebuilt. Not against her, against uncertainty, against chaos, against the kind of decisions people make when money and fear sit too close together in the same room. What she made of that understanding was her own business. Daniel tended his African violets. He called Claire on Sundays. Marcus brought the children the first weekend of every month, and they were working their way through the box of photographs, which contained 3 decades of evidence that a family had existed here, had loved and argued and grown and changed and continued. Lily had appointed herself the official labeler and applied small sticky notes to the backs of each one in her careful, slightly leftward tilted handwriting. Oliver had not changed his position on dogs. Daniel respected this. On Christmas morning, a small package arrived from Marcus and Serena, the card said, both names this time. Inside was a framed photograph Daniel had never seen before. Himself and Marcus and Lily and Oliver at the beach 2 summers ago, all 4 of them squinting into the sun, Oliver's mouth open mid-laugh, Lily caught in motion with her hair blown sideways. Marcus with his arm around his father's shoulders. Someone, Serena, it must have been, had taken it. Even people who are complicated, Margaret had once told him, are capable of beautiful things. He hung the photograph in the hallway beside the African violets, where the morning light could find it.